"Can you sew, miss?" That's all he said. No hello. No name. Just 4 words flat as the Wyoming plains cold as a man who'd stopped expecting anything from anyone. And Maren Voss, standing in the dust with one bag, and 4 days before the bank took everything she'd ever called hers, looked that man straight in the eye and said, "Yes, I can sew." What she didn't say, what he had absolutely no idea, was that the same hands that could mend a curtain were about to save his entire ranch from a man who'd already written the deed over in his own name. If you're watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't go anywhere, because it's only just started. The stagecoach rattled to a stop just past noon, and the first thing Maren Voss felt when she stepped down was the wind, not a gentle prairie breeze, but a hard, flat gust that came off the ridge like it had somewhere better to be and resented being interrupted. It hit her full in the face, yanked a strand of dark hair loose from its pin, and did not apologize. She didn't flinch. She'd been riding since before sunrise, packed into that coach between a traveling patent medicine salesman who smelled of camphor and optimism and a young mother whose infant had screamed through most of Wyoming. Maren had said exactly 7 words the entire journey, 3 to decline a biscuit, and 4 to thank the driver when he handed her bag down from the rack. The bag was not large. It held 2 dresses, a change of underlinen, a cooking tin, a dog-eared ledger she'd been using for 3 years, and a needle case her mother had given her the day she married Edmund Voss. The needle case was the most important thing in the bag. It always had been, even before she understood why. She stood on the hard-packed road and looked at what she'd come for. The Decker Ranch did not look like salvation. It looked like a place that had given up on itself sometime around 1871 and never quite recovered. The main house sat back from the road at the end of a rutted track, its porch sagging on the left side like a man favoring a bad leg. 2 of the porch boards had buckled entirely. The windows facing the road were dark. One of them was boarded over with rough-cut planking that hadn't been sealed properly, so the wind had gotten underneath and begun to peel it back. The garden to the east was mostly thistle. The hayloft above the attached barn had a gap in the eave where something, weather or neglect or both, had peeled the wood back. A tool shed to the rear had lost its door entirely and stood open to the elements. Maren looked at all of this without expression. She'd seen worse. She had in fact lived worse for the last 8 months of her marriage and for the 4 months after Edmund died, when she'd been trying to hold their homestead together with nothing but calloused hands and a ledger that kept telling her the same ugly story, no matter how many times she added the numbers. 4 days. That was what she had. 4 days before the Laramie Savings and Lending Company sent a man out to put a notice on her door. She knew that notice by its official language. She'd read one before, nailed to the door of a neighboring widow the spring before last. That woman had been gone within a week, riding east on the stage, her face closed and exhausted. Maren was not going east. She picked up her bag. He was standing at the corner of the barn. She hadn't seen him when she got off the coach. He'd come around from the far side, probably from checking the horses, and he was wiping his hands on a rag that had not been cleaned for some time. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall and broad through the shoulders in a way that looked less like strength and more like the kind of body that had simply been worked hard and shaped accordingly, like a fence post, functional and unapologetic. His face was weathered past his years. She guessed him at 35, maybe closer to 40. Dark hair too long at the collar. A jaw that looked like it had made up its mind about something years ago and never reopened the question. He looked at her bag. He looked at her. Then he said it. "Can you sew?" Not hello. Not you must be Mrs. Voss. Not did you have a safe journey? Just that. 4 words. Flat and direct as a land survey. Maren felt something shift in her chest. Not quite offense, not quite surprise. Something more like recognition. She had known men like this. Men so long accustomed to function over formality that courtesy had atrophied like a muscle no longer used. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I can sew." He nodded once, as though she'd confirmed something he'd already decided. "Kitchen's through the back. Fire needs stoking. And he turned and walked back around the barn. She did not stoke the fire first. She set her bag inside the door and walked slowly through the house instead, through the front room, the kitchen, the narrow hall that led to 2 back rooms and a root cellar that smelled of damp earth and old potatoes. She moved quietly the way she always moved when she was thinking, which was most of the time. Her hands touched door frames pressed against window casings to test their seal, tapped a floorboard in the kitchen that responded with a deep hollow sound rotted underneath, she noted, but not dangerously so. Not yet. The kitchen itself was survivable. The iron stove was good old majestic range, solid as the day it was cast, though the flue damper was stuck and would need freeing. The table was scarred but level. The shelves held canned goods, some labeled, some not. There were mouse droppings in the corner behind the flour barrel. She found the household ledger on the shelf above the dry sink. She didn't mean to look at it right then. She'd only been inside 10 minutes. But it was sitting there open, and her eyes went to it the way her eyes always went to numbers automatically, the way other people's eyes went to faces. She picked it up. She read 3 pages. Then she set it down carefully, the way you set down something that might break, and she stood very still for a moment. The ledger told a story. Not a good one. Kid. Cal Decker came in through the back door at 1:30, bringing cold air and the smell of horse and hay with him. He stopped when he saw her at the kitchen table. She had the ledger open in front of her. She also had a sheet of her own paper. She'd found it in her bag, without looking, fingers locating it by habit, and she was writing. "What are you doing?" he said. "Checking your accounts," she said without looking up. The silence that followed had weight. "I didn't ask you to do that," he said. "No." She agreed. She put her pen down and looked at him. "But someone should have done it 6 months ago. You've been double billed for the August grain delivery, $42, and there's an entry in October that looks like a renewal payment on your land note, except the note number doesn't match the one in the deed summary you've got folded in the back cover. That concerns me more." He stared at her. She stared back. She had dark eyes, nearly black in the kitchen's dim light, and whatever was behind them was steady and entirely unimpressed with silence as a form of intimidation. "You read the deed summary," he said. "It was in the ledger." "That's my property." "Yes," she said. "It is. And you'd like to keep it that way, I imagine." Another silence. She watched him decide something, could see it moving across his face the way weather moves across open country, visible from a distance, arriving slowly, impossible to stop once it got started. "The stove needs," he started. "The flue damper is stuck," she said. "I'll free it before supper. The floor plank by the dry sink is soft underneath, not dangerous yet, but it'll need addressing before winter. The garden's full of thistle, but the soil underneath is workable. You've got a good well, I expect, or you wouldn't have run cattle here this long." He had not moved from the doorway. "The board on the front window," she continued, "has been peeling away from the lower left corner. Once the cold sets in properly, you'll lose heat through that gap faster than the stove can replace it." Cal Decker put his hand on the doorframe. "Mrs. Voss," he said finally. "Yes." "Did anybody tell you what I was hiring for?" "A housekeeper," she said. "Cooking, mending, general care of the domestic arrangements." "That's right." "Then I suggest you let me do my job," she said pleasantly, and picked her pen back up. He left without another word. Marin let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding slow and controlled through her nose. Her hand under the table where he couldn't see, it was pressed flat against her thigh. It was a habit she'd developed, pressing her palm down hard on her leg when she needed to keep her face calm. Edmund had called it her stone face. He'd meant it as criticism. She'd always thought of it as armor. She looked at the ledger again. The October entry troubled her more than the double billing. The double billing was careless record-keeping, probably by whatever feed merchant Cal used, easily disputed money recoverable. But the land note discrepancy was different. If the payment in October had been applied to the wrong note, or worse, if someone had applied it deliberately to a different account, then Cal Decker might be in default on his original land obligation without knowing it. And if he was in default, then the bank or whoever held the note could move to collect. She thought of the notice on her own door, the one that would go up in 4 days. She thought about what happened to people who lost their land notes in Wyoming in 1882. She wrote faster. Supper that night was salt pork and cornbread and a can of preserved tomatoes she found on the back shelf. Not much, but hot, which was more than the kitchen had seen in some time, judging by the cold grease in the skillet that had been sitting unwashed on the stove. Cal came in at dusk without being called. She noticed that the fact that he came in when there was food ready, as though some part of him had tracked the smell of cooking through the barn wall and responded before his mind caught up with the decision. He washed his hands at the basin. He sat down. She put a plate in front of him and sat across with her own. They ate in silence for 3 minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence, exactly more like the silence between two people who haven't decided yet whether to trust each other and are each waiting to see who moves first. Cal moved first. "How long were you married?" he asked. She looked up. 7 years. "He a rancher?" "He tried to be." A pause. "He was a better man than a rancher." Something moved across Cal's face, not quite sympathy, not quite understanding. Something quieter than either of those things. "You run the place after he died?" he asked. "For 4 months," she said. "Until the note came due." He put his fork down, looked at her. "That's why you're here." "I'm here because you needed someone who could sew," she said evenly. "Isn't that what you asked?" His jaw tightened. Not in anger, more like a man biting down on something he'd intended to say and changing his mind. "The land note discrepancy you found." "Yes." "How bad?" She set down her own fork and folded her hands on the table in front of her, the way she'd learned to do when she needed to deliver information that would hurt and wanted to keep the delivery clean and free of unnecessary distress. "I don't know yet," she said. "I need to see the original deed document, not just the summary. And I need to know the name of whoever holds the note, the actual holder, not just the bank's servicing agent." He was quiet. "Cal." She said his name first time she'd used it, and she saw him register it, a slight shift in his posture. "I've been through this, on my own land. I know what this looks like when it's going the wrong direction, and I'm telling you that right now, yours might be." "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything except the numbers in front of me," she said. "But the numbers concern me." The fire in the stove ticked quietly. "The deed's in the strongbox under the bed in the back room," he said finally. "I'll need to look at it tonight," she said. He nodded once. She picked up her fork again. She worked at the kitchen table by lamplight until past midnight. The deed was worse than she'd feared. Not catastrophic, not yet, but the land note payments had been recorded in 2 separate ledgers by 2 different hands, and somewhere between the 2 6 months' worth of entries had diverged. What Cal believed he'd paid on his note, and what the surviving written record showed, were not the same number. The gap was not enormous in dollar terms, perhaps $60, perhaps $70, but in terms of default standing, it was significant enough to matter. She also found tucked inside the deed cover a handwritten receipt. The receipt was dated March of the previous year. It bore the signature of a man named Heron Cutter. She read it twice. She set it face down on the table and pressed both palms flat against the wood. Heron Cutter. She'd heard that name twice since she'd arrived in the territory. Once from the station agent in town, who'd used it in passing with the particular casual care of someone who wanted to mention a thing without appearing to dwell on it. And once from the woman at the dry goods counter who had said it while looking at the floor. Men whose names people said while looking at the floor were not men who played by frontier conventions of fair dealing. She turned the receipt back over. It was for a personal loan, $20 lent by Cutter to Edmund Voss. No wait. She looked again. Not Edmund Voss. Cal Decker. Cal Decker, dated March 1881, signed by both men. $20. With a rider clause at the bottom in smaller handwriting easy to miss if you weren't looking, which said clearly that in the event of non-payment within the calendar year, the lender retained right of first claim on the East 40 acres as described in Appendix B of the Decker land patent. The calendar year had ended. March 1882 had come and gone, and she was sitting here now in June. Marin closed her eyes. She thought about this very carefully. Then she opened her eyes, picked up her pen, and kept working. At some point, past 2 a.m, she heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. She didn't look up. "You should sleep," she said. A pause. Then Cal's voice rough with something between exhaustion and stubbornness. "What did you find?" She looked up then. He was standing in the hallway entrance, still dressed, which meant he hadn't slept either. His arms were crossed, not in defiance, but in the way of a man bracing himself, the posture of someone who knew bad news was coming and was trying to stand up straight enough to receive it. She had known men who crumbled when news arrived. Edmund had crumbled. He hadn't meant to, hadn't wanted to. He'd just had no architecture inside him to hold the weight. She had always built her architecture on her own. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She set the Cutter receipt in front of him. She watched his face as he read it. Watched the moment he got to the rider clause. Watched the color change, not dramatically, not in the way men in dime novels went pale at revelation. Just a slight tightening around the eyes, a controlled, careful adjustment. "He came to me in March of last year," Cal said slowly. "My north fence needed repair. I didn't have cash on hand." "Did you read this when you signed it?" A long pause. "He said it was standard," Cal said. She held his gaze. "Did not say you should have read it. Did not say this is how men like Cutter operate. Did not say any of the true things that would not help him now. The payment deadline has passed," she said instead. "Which means technically he has a claim. Whether that claim is legally enforceable depends on whether the rider clause is valid under Wyoming territorial land law, and that depends on the specific language of your original patent. Is it valid?" She picked up the paper she'd been writing on. "I've been working through the territorial code. There's a renewal clause in land note law from 1879 that limits third-party rider agreements if they conflict with the primary note holder's interests. Your original patent was issued through the Federal Land Office, which has priority. Cutter's rider may not be enforceable against a federally issued patent without explicit consent from the Land Office." He stared at her. "May not be," he said. "May not be," she agreed. "I need to verify the specific statute language, and I need to know if Cutter's been paid anything against that $20 since March." "He hasn't come for it," Cal said. "He will," she said. "Men like that wait until the moment is most useful to them. They don't come in winter when travel is hard, and everyone is struggling. They come in late spring, early summer, when the land looks its best, and you've just enough hope to hurt." The lamp between them flickered once in a draft from the stuck damper. "How do you know that?" he asked quietly. She looked at the lamp for a moment. "Because that's when they came for my land," she said. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Not the silence of two strangers deciding whether to trust each other. Something more complicated than that. Something with more weight. Cal picked up the receipt and read it again. Then he set it down. "What do you need?" he said. She looked up. "To finish tonight, and tomorrow I need to get to the land office in town." "I'll drive you." "You don't need to." "I'll drive you," he said again. She looked at him for a moment. He was not a man who said things twice without meaning them. She understood that already. "All right," she said. She picked up her pen. He didn't move. She glanced up. "Thank you," he said. And it came out slightly rough, like a word in a language he didn't use often enough to make smooth. She nodded once. He went back to the hall. This time she heard him stop at the far room, heard the soft close of a door. Marin Voss turned back to her work. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the ridge pines. The lamp burned steady, and somewhere deep in the numbers on that table, she could feel the shape of a way through this, thin as a needle, precise as a seam, if she could just find the right thread. She always found the thread. That was what she did. She was already at the table when Cal came out at 5 in the morning. Not still there from the night before. She'd slept maybe 3 hours on top of the blanket in the back room with her boots still on. But she was up before the sky turned, and the lamp was burning again, and there were 2 new sheets of paper covered in her small, precise handwriting laid out beside the original ledger. Cal stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the papers. He looked at the stove, where somehow impossibly, the flue was drawing properly, and a fire was already going, and a pot of coffee was sitting on the back plate. "You fixed the damper," he said. "Last night, before I slept." "How?" "Wrapped a rag around a wooden spoon and worked it loose from the inside." She didn't look up. It wasn't seized, just hadn't been moved in so long it forgot how. He stood there for another moment. Then he went to the stove and poured a cup of coffee, and sat down at the far end of the table, and she could feel him reading over the papers from that distance, trying to understand what she'd built in the dark hours while he slept. "I found the statute," she said. He set down the cup. "Wyoming Territorial Land Code 1879, Section 14, Subsection 3. She turned one of the sheets toward him. "A rider agreement attached to a federally issued land patent is not enforceable if it creates a competing claim against the primary note holder without prior written consent from the issuing land office. Cutter never got that consent. He couldn't have. The land office doesn't issue that kind of approval quietly. There'd be a record." Cal picked up the sheet. "Read it." "So he doesn't have the claim," he said slowly. "He has a piece of paper that looks like a claim," she said. "That's different. But if he presents it to a territorial judge who doesn't know the code, or if you're not in the room to contest it, then that piece of paper can do a great deal of damage before anyone sorts out the truth." He was quiet. "He'll know that," she said. "Men like Cutter always know exactly how far their paper will take them before someone pushes back." Cal set the sheet down, looked at her directly. "What do we do?" She noticed the "we." She suspected he did not notice it himself. "We go to the land office today," she said. "We get a certified copy of your original patent with the federal notation. We also request a review of your note payment history from their records. If any payments were misposted, the federal file will show the correct accounting. That gives us 2 things: proof that the rider is unenforceable and a clean payment record that disputes the default claim. And the double billing from the grain merchant. I'll write a formal dispute letter this morning," she said. "He'll have to refund or credit. It won't be a fight. The record is clear. He either made an error or he hoped you wouldn't check." Cal's jaw moved slightly. "I didn't check." "No," she said. "Not unkindly, just a fact." He looked at the table. "My wife used to handle the books." Marin was very still for a moment. "I didn't know you'd been married." 3 years ago, he said. "She went back east. Said Wyoming was no place for a life." A pause, short and flat. Maybe she was right. Marin looked at him for a moment. He was not looking for sympathy. She could tell the difference between a man who wanted comfort and a man who was simply stating geography. "That's why the ledger was in the shape it was in," she said. "I'm not a numbers man," he said. "I know." She pulled the sheet back toward her. "That's all right. You don't have to be." Chaktiar. They left for town at 7 in Cal's wagon. It was a long ride, over an hour each way, on roads that were more suggestion than surface, and they were mostly quiet, but it was a different quiet than the day before. The silence had texture now. It had the shape of things that had been said, and things that were still being considered. About 20 minutes out, Cal spoke. "The Cutter receipt," he said. "How did you know to look for something like that?" "I didn't," she said. "I was looking at the payment records and the numbers weren't resolving cleanly, so I went back to the source documents." She paused. "My husband had a receipt like that. Different man, same structure. Small loan, large rider buried in plain language." "What happened?" "He signed it." Another pause. "He didn't read it, which is how Cutter's men prefer it. By the time I found it, we were already past the default date. She looked at the road ahead. I fought it for 4 months. Got as far as proving the rider was unconscionable under Missouri territorial standards, but we were in Wyoming by then, and the judge was not interested in Missouri standards. She said it plainly, no bitterness in her voice, but her hand pressed flat against her thigh. Cal glanced at her. That's how you lost the homestead. That's how Edmund lost the homestead, she said. I just happened to be living in it at the time. He didn't say anything for a moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. She looked at him sidelong. The word came out like he'd had to find it in a drawer, where things rarely used got stored, a little stiff, a little unfamiliar in his mouth, but genuine. Thank you, she said. They rode another mile in silence. You know his name? Cal said. Cutter. You knew it before you found the receipt. It wasn't a question. I've heard it, she said carefully. He operates through the territory, Cal said. His voice had gone flatter now, the way voices go flat when a man is keeping himself from going somewhere heated. Small loans, buried riders. He's done it to 3 ranches in this county alone that I know about. Dillard's South 40, the Keene Widow's water access, and the Morrison homestead before they sold. Marin turned to look at him fully. Did any of them fight it? Dillard tried. Cutter had a lawyer from Cheyenne. Dillard had himself in a handshake agreement. Cal's hands tightened on the reins once briefly. He lost the 40. But you have something Dillard didn't, she said. What? She held up the sheet she'd brought with her, the handwritten statute summary, the federal code citation, the notation she'd cross-referenced from the land office records she'd found referenced in the patent appendix. You have this, she said, and someone who knows how to use it. He looked at the paper, then at her. He didn't say anything. But something shifted in his face, not gratitude exactly, not yet. More like the beginning of a recalibration. Like a man who'd been looking at a fixed point and suddenly realized the horizon was further out than he'd thought. He turned back to the road. Marin set the paper on her knee and smoothed it with her palm. The land office in town was a single room that smelled of ink and old paper, and the particular bureaucratic staleness of places where important things happen slowly. The clerk behind the counter was a thin man with careful eyes, who looked at Maureen when she walked in, then at Cal, then back at Maureen when she spoke first. She set her notes on the counter. I need a certified copy of the Decker land patent, the original federal issuance with all notations and appendices, she said. And a review of the payment record on the primary note. I believe there may be a posting discrepancy in the October and November entries. The clerk blinked. And you are? Marin Voss. I manage the Decker accounts. She said it without hesitation, without qualification, without the half-apologetic softening that most women of her time and station would have added instinctively. The clerk looked at Cal. Cal said nothing. Just looked back at the clerk with the particular steady expression of a man who has decided to let the person next to him handle something and has enough sense not to undermine them while they're doing it. The clerk pulled the file. It took 40 minutes. Marin stood at the counter the entire time reading each page as the clerk produced it, asking pointed questions about specific entries, requesting 2 rechecks on the payment ledger, and writing notes in her own hand that she then compared against the federal records, line by line. Cal stood slightly behind and to her left. He didn't speak. He watched. What he watched was a woman who moved through paperwork the way he moved through a difficult fence repair methodically, without wasted motion, without self-doubt, reading each problem as it appeared, and solving it before moving to the next one. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress. She was simply doing what she knew how to do, the way people do things they have done long enough that the knowledge lives in their hands and eyes rather than just their minds. He found that unexpectedly he did not want to look away. When the clerk produced the certified copy of the patent, Marin read the appendices carefully, then turned to the specific section regarding rider agreements. She read it twice. There it is, she said quietly. She turned the page toward Cal, and pointed to a single paragraph third from the bottom that he would never have found on his own. He read it. He read it again. "The writer's unenforceable," he said. "Not just unenforceable," she said. "Potentially fraudulent. The language here requires that any writer agreement against a federal patent be registered with this office within 60 days of signing. Cutter's wasn't registered." She looked at the clerk. "Is there any record of a writer filing against the Decker patent? Any supplemental claim from a Heron Cutter?" The clerk checked. He shook his head. "Then the writer is not only unenforceable," Marin said evenly. "It's void ab initio. It never legally attached to the patent at all." Cal looked at her. Something crossed his face that he didn't entirely manage to keep out of his expression. Something that was not quite the word relief, too large for that, too complicated. "Write me a certificate," she said to the clerk, "showing no supplemental claims have been filed against the Decker patent. I need it notarized." The clerk nodded and reached for his stamp. They stopped at the dry goods store on the way back to the wagon. Marin needed thread, real thread, not the frayed spool she'd found in the kitchen drawer, and a new draw knife, if the hardware side carried them, because the porch boards were going to need proper shaping before they could be replaced. Cal stopped outside the store while she went in. When she came out, he was talking to a man she didn't recognize. The man was standing with his back to her, but she could read the conversation from the outside, the particular posture of two men who know each other but do not like each other, one of them choosing friendly language and the other not bothering. She stopped on the step. The man turned before she reached them, as though he'd heard her boots on the board. He was perhaps 50 heavy across the shoulders, with a face that had learned to arrange itself into a pleasant expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at her the way men like that always looked at women like Marin, a quick, complete assessment that filed her under a category and moved on. "This your housekeeper," he said to Cal. "This is Mrs. Voss," Cal said. His voice was level, controlled. The man extended his hand to her. "Heron Cutter," he said. "Pleasure." Marin shook his hand because it would have been conspicuous not to. His grip was firm in the deliberate way of men who use a handshake to communicate something they prefer not to say out loud. "I've heard your name," she said pleasantly. "Good things, I hope," he said. "Informative things," she said. Something moved in his eyes, a reassessment quick and carefully hidden. "Cal," he said, turning back. "I've been meaning to come out. That business from last March, the loan agreement. The year's well past, as I'm sure you know. I thought we might settle it before it needs to go to any kind of formal proceeding." "I appreciate that," Cal said. Cutter smiled. The smile had the quality of a tool being used for a purpose it wasn't originally designed for. "I'm not an unreasonable man. We've been neighbors a long time." "We have," Cal agreed. Marin kept her face entirely still. She stood slightly behind Cal's left shoulder, which was where she had been standing in the land office, and she watched Heron Cutter, the way she'd watched the ledger the night before, looking for the number that didn't add up. She found it quickly. He wasn't here by accident. He'd either seen them come into town, or he'd been watching for a trip to the land office. The timing was not coincidence. Men like Cutter did not deal in coincidences. He was moving, which meant he knew something was wrong with his position, which meant he already had some sense that the receipt might be challenged, which meant he was trying to get Cal to agree to something verbally in front of a witness before Cal understood what he actually held in his hand. "I'd be willing to accept the 20 as paid in full," Cutter said, still in that warm, reasonable voice. "Just your word on it right here, between neighbors. No need to involve paperwork." "That's very generous," Cal said. "You don't need to decide this moment," Cutter said. "But the longer it sits—" "We've just come from the land office," Marin said. She said it quietly, the way you say a thing when you want it to land cleanly. Not loudly, not triumphantly, just a statement of fact placed precisely. Cutter turned to look at her. His face did not change. That was the tell. A man who heard an innocent statement would react with mild curiosity. A man who heard a threat would work very hard to look like he hadn't. Heron Cutter's face did not change. "Is that right?" he said. "We requested a certified search of the patent record," she said. "No supplemental claims on file." She let that sit for one beat. "Interesting, isn't it? Given the rider language in the loan agreement." The pleasant expression was still in place. But something underneath it had shifted. She could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. "Well," he said, "perhaps we should take some time. No rush." He nodded to Cal. "Cal." He nodded to Marin. "Mrs. Voss." He walked away down the street. Cal waited until he was out of earshot. "He knew," he said. "He knew the moment I said land office," she said. "He came here looking to get me to agree to something before we knew what the patent actually said. Yes." She picked up her package from the step. "He'll be back, but not today. He needs to find out exactly what we found, and whether it means what he thinks it means." "Does it mean what he thinks it means?" She looked at Cal directly. "Yes," she said. "It means exactly that." For a moment, they stood on that step in the morning light, the certified certificate in her bag, the notation she'd written in her own hand folded against it, and she watched something complete itself in Cal Decker's expression. Something that had been half-formed and uncertain, and was now settling into a shape she recognized. He was beginning to understand what she was. Not a housekeeper, not a widow making do. Something considerably more. The porch boards occupied her that afternoon. She'd bought the draw knife at the hardware counter the storekeeper had given her, a look that she'd returned with complete serenity until he'd wrapped it without further comment. And she went at the warped boards with the systematic patience of someone who had done physical repair work long enough to know that the secret is never force, always angle. Cal came out of the barn at one point and stood watching. "You've done that before," he said. "My father was a carpenter," she said, not stopping. "He said there were two kinds of people, those who looked at broken things and saw problems, and those who looked at broken things and saw the shape of what they'd been." She pulled the blade along the grain. "He taught me to see the second way." Cal was quiet for a moment. "The boarded window," he said. "The seal's going." "I know. I'll get to it." "I can—" "Cal." She looked up at him. "I can do it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and went back to the barn. She went back to the board. It took her the better part of 2 hours to properly shape and reset the 3 worst planks on the left side of the porch. Her hands were rough from it, the heel of her right palm reddened where the draw knife handle had pressed. She didn't mind. Work that left a mark was work you could point to afterward. When she was done, she stood up and tested the boards with her weight. Solid. Good. She looked at the house, the window, the garden, the hayloft gap, the rotted floorboard in the kitchen, the curtains in the front room that were more memory than fabric. A list, a long one, she'd worked through longer. That evening over supper, beans this time with what remained of the salt pork and a pan of biscuits she'd made from the flour after she'd checked it for weevils. Cal reached across the table for the salt and paused. He looked at her hands. The redness from the draw knife. A small cut on her left forefinger from the window board, which she'd taped with a strip of clean cloth. "You should have said," he said. "Said what?" "That you were going to do the porch." "I could have—" "Done it yourself," she said. "Helped." She looked at him. He was not offering out of condescension. She'd been around enough of that to know the difference. He was offering out of something simpler, less complicated, the reflexive, practical instinct of someone who saw work and wanted to share the weight. She found unexpectedly that she had to take a small breath before answering. "Tomorrow," she said. "The window board. I'll need someone to hold the exterior piece while I seal the interior casing, if you have time." "I'll have time," he said. She picked up her fork. He picked up his. The beans were good. She was a better cook than she let on, because she'd learned early that being too competent in the kitchen made people stop looking for what else you could do. "The grain merchant letter," Cal said after a while. "Did you send it?" Left it with the postal agent this morning while you were loading the wagon. She reached into her apron pocket and produced the receipt. They'll need to respond within 30 days. If they don't, you can file for collection through the county clerk. He took the receipt, looked at it. Marin, he said. She looked up. That's the second time you've done something I didn't know I needed done before I needed to ask for it. She considered that. That's what managing a household means, she said. No, he said carefully. It isn't. Managing a household means cooking and mending. He set the receipt on the table between them. This is something else. She didn't say anything. I'm not complaining, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know, she said. He stopped, tried again. I've been running this place alone for 3 years, since Sarah left. And I've been... Another stop, this one longer. Losing ground. Slowly. Not all at once, just a little at a time. The ledger, the payments, the fence that needed work in the fall that I put off until spring. The spring thing I put off until summer. He looked at the table. You've been here 2 days. 1.5, she said. His mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. Something in that direction. 1.5 days, he said. And the ledger is corrected. Cutter's receipt is voided. The porch doesn't creak anymore. The flue draws. He looked up at her. What's wrong with you? She blinked. I mean that sincerely, he said quickly. I mean, why are you here? Doing this, answering an advertisement for a housekeeper when you could be... He gestured slightly, encompassing all the evidence she'd produced in 36 hours. Whatever it is you actually are. Marin was quiet for a moment. Because the bank is taking my homestead in 3 days, she said. And I needed work. He held her gaze. And because, she continued more slowly, I am very tired of watching men sign papers they haven't read and lose things they could have kept. She folded her hands on the table. I don't mean you specifically. I mean all of them. My husband, Mr. Dillard, the Keene widow's late father, who put the water access in someone else's name 20 years ago because it seemed simpler at the time. She paused. I know what it costs, and I know how to stop it if someone lets me. Cal looked at her for a long time. Consider yourself let, he said quietly. The lamp burned between them. Outside, the Wyoming wind had settled into something lower and steadier, less aggressive than the day before, the kind of wind that doesn't push, just persists. Marin nodded once. She reached for her coffee. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted in its stall. The house, which had been empty of any particular feeling for 3 years, held them both in its silence, and this time, the silence was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of a place beginning slowly, and with great care, to be inhabited again. He came on a Thursday. Marin knew he would come that week. She'd felt it the way you feel a change in weather before the clouds arrive. Not a premonition. Nothing mystical, just the accumulated logic of watching how men like Heron Cutter operated. He'd had 4 days since the encounter outside the dry goods store. 4 days to make inquiries, to find out exactly what she and Cal had pulled from the land office, to consult with whoever he consulted with when his schemes developed friction. 4 days was enough time for a man like that to decide whether to retreat or to press harder. She had prepared for pressing harder. The table in the front room held 3 documents. The certified patent copy with the federal notation. The notarized certificate showing no supplemental rider had been filed. And a 3rd document she'd written herself the night before, slowly and carefully, in the clear formal language she'd learned from reading every legal notice that had ever come to her door. A written declaration of the rider's void status, citing the specific statutory language from the 1879 Territorial Code, cross-referenced to the federal patent issuance date, signed by Marin Voss as account manager for the Decker Ranch, and countersigned by Cal. Cal had signed it at breakfast without asking her to explain every line. He'd read it, looked up at her once, and signed it. That had meant something to her, though she hadn't said so. She was in the kitchen when she heard the horse. 2 horses, actually. She registered that immediately. Cutter hadn't come alone. She heard Cal come out of the back room where he'd been repairing a harness. Heard his boots on the floorboard she hadn't gotten to yet, the one that still gave that hollow sound. Heard him go to the front door. She picked up the 3 documents, smoothed them once against her palm, and walked to the front room. Cutter had brought a man with him. Younger heavyset with the look of someone employed specifically to stand in a certain way and communicate a certain thing without saying anything at all. He stayed on his horse while Cutter dismounted. Cutter was in his good coat. That was the first thing Marin noticed. He'd dressed for this, not for a neighborly call for an occasion. His boots were clean. He'd made a decision about how this was going to go, and he'd dressed accordingly. Cal stood on the porch. He hadn't invited Cutter in. "Cal," Cutter said with that same warm, reasonable voice. "Good to see you. Got a few minutes." "What do you need, Heron?" Cal said. No preamble, no reciprocal warmth. Marin noted with quiet satisfaction that Cal had dropped the performance entirely. No social padding, just a direct question that established from the first syllable that this was Cal's property and Cal's time, and Cutter was a visitor requesting something, not a man arriving with authority. Good. Cutter's eyes went to Marin in the doorway behind Cal, stayed there 1 beat longer than necessary, then back to Cal. "It's about the loan agreement," Cutter said, "from last March. I think there may have been some confusion. I'd like to clear it up." "What kind of confusion?" Cal said. "Well, it seems you're—" He paused. The pause doing work he didn't want to do out loud. Housekeeper may have gotten an incomplete picture of the arrangement. The land office records aren't always current, and I'd hate for a misunderstanding to— "The land office records are current," Marin said. She said it from the doorway, not loudly, not aggressively, just clearly. Cutter turned to her with his careful, pleasant face. "Mrs. Voss, I don't think we've been formally—" "We met outside Granger's store," she said. "Tuesday. You offered to settle the loan verbally and without paperwork, which I found interesting, given that the loan agreement itself contained a rider clause that required formal documentation." A small silence. "I was trying to make things simpler," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what concerned me." She stepped forward onto the porch and placed the first document in Cal's hand, without looking at him. A clean handoff, practiced deliberate. Cal took it without hesitation. "The certified patent copy," she said for Cutter's benefit. "Federal issuance 1877, with the full appendix notation which includes—" She placed her finger on the relevant paragraph without breaking eye contact with Cutter. "The requirement that any supplemental rider agreement must be registered with the issuing land office within 60 days of execution. Your rider agreement was executed in March of last year." She looked at him. "Can you tell me the registration date?" Cutter's pleasant face didn't move, but his eyes did. A small controlled shift, a man calculating. "Records aren't always complete," he said. "This one is," she said. She held up the second document, the notarized certificate. "The land office provided a certified search record showing no supplemental claims filed against the Decker patent. None. Not within 60 days. Not ever." The man on the horse shifted his weight. Cal was completely still. Marin could feel it beside her, that particular stillness of a man who is letting someone else handle something and keeping himself from interfering the way you keep yourself from adjusting a perfectly thrown line. Patient. Present. "Now," Marin said. "It's possible this was an oversight on your part. It's possible the rider was always intended to be registered and simply wasn't through some failure of process." She kept her voice even, neutral, as if she were discussing grain prices. "But the legal result is the same either way. The rider never attached to the patent, which means it is void, which means the $20 loan, to the extent it created any legal instrument at all, created only a personal debt obligation, not a land claim, and that debt, if it still exists, is subject to standard territorial collection law, not a land seizure." Cutter looked at her for a long moment. "You've done your research," he said. His tone had shifted. The warmth was still there technically, but it had gone thin, like ice that still looks solid but makes a different sound when you step on it. I manage the accounts, she said. So you said. He tilted his head slightly. Tell me, Mrs. Voss, where did you learn to read territorial code? I learned to read the law the same place most women learn it, she said. From watching what happened when they didn't. A beat, just one. And then something broke in Heron Cutter's face. Not dramatically, he was too controlled for drama. But the pleasant expression stopped doing its job just for a second, the way a mask slips when the man behind it forgets to hold it, and what was underneath was not pleasant at all. That's a strong position, he said, and now his voice had no warmth in it whatsoever. Just the underlying structure, which was harder and less agreeable than the surface had suggested. For a housekeeper. I'm not a housekeeper, Marin said. It came out before she'd fully decided to say it. Not angry, not defiant. Just true in the flat, declarative way of things that have always been true and have simply been waiting for the correct moment of acknowledgement. Cal turned his head slightly and looked at her. She didn't look back at him. She kept her eyes on Cutter. I manage these accounts, she said. I represent the interests of this ranch in any matter pertaining to its financial and legal standing. And I'm telling you now, formally and on record, she held up the third document, that the Decker Ranch considers the March 1881 Rider Agreement null void and without legal force. Any attempt to present it to a territorial court will be met with this documentation, this statutory citation, and a counterfiling for fraudulent encumbrance of a federally issued land patent. The word fraudulent hung in the air between them like smoke. Cutter looked at the document in her hand. He looked at Cal. Cal met his eyes with the steady, flat gaze of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. You'd have a hard time making that charge stick, Cutter said finally. Maybe, Marin said, but you'd have to answer it. In court, in front of a territorial judge who would also be looking at the Dillard 40 the Keene water access and the Morrison homestead. She let that sit for precisely 1 second. I've been doing research, Mr. Cutter, broadly. The man on the horse cleared his throat. Cutter didn't move. But something had left him that forward energy, that sense of a man who had arrived with a plan and was executing it. He was recalculating now. She could see it. The math was no longer working the way he'd expected. This isn't finished, he said. No, she agreed. But today's business is. She looked at him steadily. I think you know your way out. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. She counted. Then he turned, walked to his horse and mounted. The younger man turned his horse immediately. Cutter did not look back. They rode. Done. Cal waited until the sound of hooves had faded entirely. Then he turned and looked at Marin. She was still holding the 3 documents. Her hand was steady. Her face was composed. But he was standing close enough closer than he usually stood, because the porch wasn't wide to see that the hand holding the papers had the faintest tremor. Not fear. The aftermath of held tension releasing, now that there was no longer anyone to hold it for. Marin, he said. I know, she said. That may have accelerated things. If he decides to file before we can be— Marin. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression she didn't have an immediate category for. Not the recalibrating look from before. Something more direct than that. Something that had arrived without the usual slow approach. You just told Heron Cutter that you represent this ranch, he said. I overstepped, she said. I should have asked. No, he said. I mean, you told him that like you meant it. A pause. Did you mean it? She looked at him. Her first instinct was the careful answer, the qualified answer, the answer that left room for retreat. She'd learned to give those answers over 7 years of marriage to a man who needed her to be smaller than she was in order to feel the right size himself. But Cal Decker was not that man. Yes, she said. I meant it. He nodded slowly, as if something had just been confirmed that he'd been working toward for several days. Good, he said. He took the 3rd document from her hand gently, just lifting it out of her fingers, and looked at it. Read the signature line. His name, and then below it in her careful handwriting, Marin Voss, account manager, Decker Ranch. He folded it and put it in his breast pocket. She watched him do that. Something moved in her chest that she didn't have immediate language for. The floorboard, she said, because she needed to say something practical before whatever was moving in her chest got large enough to require acknowledgement. What? The kitchen floorboard. The one that gives. I want to get to it today. She looked at the house. I'll need you to help me pull the plank. It'll need 2 people. He looked at her for another moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved that same, almost, not quite a smile she'd been cataloging since the first morning. All right, he said. Let me get the pry bar. They worked on the kitchen floor for 3 hours. The rotted plank came up in pieces worse underneath than it had looked, the subfloor damp and dark, where water had been getting in for years, through a failed caulk joint above the dry sink. Cal saw it and said a word under his breath that he then glanced at her sideways about. I've heard worse, she said, already on her knees, probing the extent of the damage. How bad? He asked. Repairable. It hasn't gotten to the joist. She sat back on her heels. We'll need to let it dry before we lay new planking. A day, maybe 2 if the weather stays damp. In the meantime, I can put down the boards from the porch offcuts. They're the right thickness I measured. He looked at her. You measured the porch offcuts. When I was shaping them, in case the kitchen floor needed them. In case anything needed them, she said. It's useful to know what you have. He crouched down beside her to look at the subfloor. They were close, close, the proximity of 2 people focused on the same problem, and she was sharply aware of it, without letting that awareness become anything that would complicate the work. My father never fixed this, Cal said. No. He knew it was soft. He told me in 1878 that we'd get to it come spring. He ran his hand along the exposed joist. Sound timber. Good. He died that winter. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. He was a stubborn man, Cal said without particular bitterness. Good rancher, better with animals than with people. A pause. Better with animals than with paperwork. Where did you learn the ranch? She asked. Here, from him. From making mistakes and having him point at them until I understood what I'd done. He looked up. He never explained anything, just pointed. Did that work? Cal considered this seriously. Eventually, he said. Marin smiled. It happened before she decided to a real one, not the composed expression she usually offered, but the actual thing. It changed her face considerably. She felt Cal register it from the side without looking directly at her, the way people register sudden light. She cleared her throat and looked back at the floor. We'll pull the damaged section, treat the joist with pitch where it's gone gray, and let it stand open overnight, she said. I'll put a board across for walking. Tomorrow we can lay the offcuts, and I'll match the stain as close as I can get it. You can match stain? Close enough, she said. It won't be perfect. Nothing's perfect, he said. No, she agreed. But close enough holds. It was while they were treating the joist, Cal applying the pitch, Marin holding the lamp at the angle that kept the work lit without getting in the way, that he said it. Tell me about Edmund. She didn't tense. She'd been expecting it at some point, the way you expect a question that's been building. It had been in the room between them for days, taking up quiet space. He was a gentle man, she said. Not weak. Gentle is different. He wanted things to be all right more than he wanted to deal with the fact that they weren't. She held the lamp steady. He believed people would be fair if you were fair to them first. He believed that right up until they weren't. The loan, Cal said. The loan, she confirmed. He signed it in a minister's office, if you can believe that. The man who brought it to him was a church elder in our county. Edmund trusted him completely. She paused. I met that elder once at a harvest supper. He shook my hand and asked me how my garden was coming. Cal worked the pitch brush slowly, carefully. Did you fight it? He asked. For 4 months, she said. I filed 3 separate challenges. The judge reviewed the first one and declined to hear the other 2. She shifted the lamp slightly. Edmund didn't want me to fight it. He said it wasn't. She considered her words seemly. For a wife to go to the land office and file legal notices. She paused again. He said people would talk. Did they? Yes, she said. They said I was difficult. Cal set down the pitch brush. He turned and looked at her fully. Difficult, he repeated. That's the word they used, she said. She met his eyes. I prefer thorough. He looked at her for a long moment in the lamplight. Then he turned back to the joist. So do I, he said quietly. She absorbed that slowly, the way you absorb warmth from a fire, not all at once, but gradually starting at the edges and working inward. They finished the treatment in silence. The twist came at supper time, and it came from a direction she hadn't prepared for. She was cutting biscuits when Cal came back in from the barn later than usual, with a letter in his hand. He'd ridden to the postal drop at the crossroads while she was cooking. She'd heard the horse go and assumed it was a routine check. His face told her it wasn't routine. This came in Tuesday, he said. Tom at the crossroads held it because he wasn't sure if I was in or out. I didn't know it was there. He set it on the table. She looked at it. The return address was the Laramie Savings and Lending Company. Her stomach contracted. Not from fear, from recognition. She knew that letterhead. She knew exactly what correspondence from that return address looked like because she had received it herself. Open it, she said. He opened it. He read it. He set it down on the table and looked at it as if it had said something in a language he was still translating. They've issued a default notice, he said. She crossed to the table and picked up the letter. Read it herself. The payment discrepancy she'd found in the ledger, the misposted October entry, the one she'd already flagged for the land office review, had been reported to the bank as a missed payment. Not an error. A missed payment. And on the strength of that report, the bank had issued a formal default notice dated 10 days prior, beginning a 60-day foreclosure process. 60 days. Less now, because the letter had sat at the crossroads for 3 days. 57 days. She stood very still. Who reported it to the bank? She said. What do you mean? She turned the letter over. Read the processing notation at the bottom, a small line of administrative text that most people never noticed because it was in the same plain type as everything else and placed at the very end below the official signature. Discrepancy reported by third-party account review, Refford H. Cutter, June 14, 1882. She put the letter down. Cal was watching her face. What is it? He said. Cutter reported the payment discrepancy to the bank, she said. Before we went to the land office. Before Tuesday. She calculated rapidly. He filed this report at least 2 weeks ago, probably more. Cal was very still. He'd already moved, she said. The conversation on Tuesday coming to see you trying to get a verbal agreement that wasn't his primary play. That was secondary. His primary move was already done. He reported a payment irregularity to the bank and let the bank issue the default notice. She picked up the letter. If the ranch goes into foreclosure proceedings, the bank sells the land to resolve the debt. And if Cutter is positioned as a buyer, he gets the land anyway, Cal said. Without the rider. Without needing the rider, she said. The rider was always the backup. This was the front door. The biscuits burned. She didn't notice until Cal moved to the stove and pulled the pan off the heat without saying anything. She was looking at the letter. Looking at the date. Looking at 57 days, which was not very long, and thinking about what could be done in 57 days by a woman who had never once in her life had as many days as she needed. Can you fix this? Cal said. He was standing at the stove with the burned biscuit pan in his hand, and he asked it the way he asked everything, without softening, without the hope-shaped framing that made a question easier to hear, but harder to answer honestly. Just straight. Just the question. She looked up at him. The payment discrepancy is documented, she said. I have the land office record showing the correct posting. If I can get that in front of the bank's own loan officer, not their collections agent, but the original issuing officer, before they advance to the next stage of proceedings, I can make the case that the default was triggered by false information. And if they don't hear it, then we go to the territorial bank examiner, she said. Cutter filed a report with a federally regulated institution. If that report contained a material misrepresentation, did it? She looked at the letter again. The discrepancy exists in the ledger, she said carefully. It's a real discrepancy, but it exists because of a posting error, not a missed payment. Whether Cutter knew that when he reported it. He knew, Cal said. His voice was flat and certain. He's been watching this place for a long time. He knew exactly what he was reporting and why. Then yes, she said. That's potentially a fraudulent report to a federal institution. She straightened. We go to Laramie. When? Tomorrow morning, she said. First light. He put the biscuit pan on the counter, looked at it. I'll get the good wagon, he said. Faster springs, better road. She nodded. He turned toward the door and stopped. Marin, he said. Yes. You're not going to lose this one. She looked at him. He was standing with his back half to her, and he said it without turning around. Fully said it in the same flat, unadorned way he said everything, without performing certainty, without the bright, false confidence people put on when they don't quite believe what they're saying. He said it the way you state a fact. Her chest did the thing again, that unmanageable movement she kept not having language for. No, she said, I'm not. He went out to see to the wagon. She stood in the kitchen in the smell of burned biscuits and wood smoke, and turned the letter over in her hands and began in the back of her mind to build the case, line by line, document by document. The way her father had taught her to build, not by hoping the structure would hold, but by checking each joint until she was sure. 57 days. She'd worked with less. She was still at the table at midnight writing when she heard the floorboard in the hall. Not the rotten one that one was open to the subfloor now carefully boarded over. The sound came from further down. Cal appeared in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the papers. He set a cup of coffee on the table beside her hand without saying anything and turned to go. Cal, she said. He stopped. Thank you, she said. He turned back slightly. In the lamplight his face was tired and something else, something quieter and less defended than the face he wore in daylight. Don't stay up all night, he said. I'll sleep when it's done. It's never done, he said. You know that. She looked at him. No, she agreed. But this part can be. He looked at her for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he went back down the hall. Marin Voss turned back to her work, and the lamp burned, and the Wyoming night pressed cold and quiet against the sealed windows, and in the kitchen of a house that was beginning to remember what it felt like to be a home. A woman built her case word by careful word, and did not stop until it was built. They left before sunrise. Cal had the wagon ready when she came out, her document case tucked under her arm, her second dress on, because the one she'd been wearing for 2 days needed washing, and she wasn't going to walk into a bank in Laramie looking like she'd slept in a hayfield. She hadn't slept much better than that, but appearances carried weight in rooms where men made decisions about other people's land, and she knew it. Cal looked at her when she climbed up. Didn't say anything about the document case, or the dress, or the fact that she'd clearly been awake most of the night. Just clicked to the horses and moved them out at a good pace, faster than their first trip to town, the road still dark and the air cold enough to see breath. About a mile out he said, "What's the argument?" "The misposting is documented in the federal payment record," she said. "The land office copy shows the October payment was received and logged on the correct date. The bank's own deposit record should show the same thing if they'll pull it." She had the document case open on her knee, already reviewing by feel in the early dark. The question is whether their collections process has already moved past the loan officer. If it has, we're talking to someone whose only job is to advance the proceeding, not evaluate it. And if that's who we get, Then I ask for the loan officer by name and I wait in the lobby until he's available, she said. Cal glanced at her sideways. I've done it before, she said. I don't doubt it, he said. The road to Laramie was long, and the morning was gray, and somewhere around the halfway point, the sun came up low and hard off the eastern ridgeline and hit them both full in the face, and neither of them flinched. Marin thought not for the first time that there was something clarifying about traveling toward a difficult thing in the early morning. The cold and the light and the forward motion stripped away everything that wasn't necessary. Tell me what Cutter wants, Cal said. The real thing, not the land. She considered this. Control, she said. The land is the mechanism. What he actually wants is to be the man who determines what happens to it, who farms it, who grazes it, who owes him something for the right to do either. She paused. Men like Cutter don't actually want property. They want the leverage that property gives them over people. He's done it enough times, Cal said. Dillard, Keene, Morrison, and each one probably thought they were the exception, she said. That Cutter was a reasonable man, that they could work it out. She looked at the road ahead. He cultivates that impression very carefully. Until Tuesday, Cal said. Until Tuesday, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. You rattled him, he said. I informed him, she said. Same thing, he said. For a man like that. The Laramie Savings and Lending Company occupied the ground floor of a two-story brick building on the main street with a name board above the door that had been painted recently, new enough that the gilt hadn't yet started to dull at the edges. An institution that wanted to look permanent, established, beyond question. Marin walked in first. The clerk at the front counter was young, perhaps 22, with the particular nervous tidiness of someone who had gotten his first good job and was determined not to lose it. He looked at Marin, then at Cal behind her, then back at Marin when she spoke. I need to speak with the loan officer on the Decker Ranch account, she said. The name on the original issuance. That would be Mr. Harlan, the clerk said. Is he in the building? Yes, but Tell him Cal Decker is here regarding the default notice received on the 14th, and that we have documentation that materially affects the bank's position. She set her document case on the counter. I'll wait. The clerk looked at the document case, at Marin, at Cal. Cal looked back at him with the particular expression of a man who had over the past week been slowly convinced that the woman standing next to him knew exactly what she was doing and had accordingly stopped second-guessing her. It was not an aggressive expression. It was simply settled. The clerk went to get Mr. Harlan. Mr. Harlan was a man in his 50s with silver at his temples and the contained watchful energy of someone who had learned that banks survived on patience and that patience was something you performed even when you didn't feel it. He came out of his office, looked at Cal, looked at Marin, looked at the document case, and made a decision about all three before anyone had said a word. Mr. Decker, he said, I'm sorry you've had to make this trip. These proceedings are... The default notice was triggered by a third-party report, Marin said, filed by a Heron Cutter referencing a payment discrepancy in the October ledger. Harlan looked at her carefully. And you are? Marin Voss. I manage the Decker accounts. She opened the document case. The discrepancy Mr. Cutter reported exists in the ranch's internal ledger as a posting error. The actual payment was made on time and in full. I have the Federal Land Office payment record showing the correct posting date, and I have the bank's own deposit slip. She produced it, which we obtained from the Land Office file copy showing receipt on October 9th. Harlan took the deposit slip. He looked at it. He looked at it again more carefully with the specific quality of attention of a man who has just found an irregularity and is deciding how large it is. Come into my office, he said. "'Kay. What happened in that office took 90 minutes. Marin had prepared for longer. She'd prepared for refusal for redirection for the particular institutional patience of a bank that had already set a process in motion and did not especially want to stop it. She had prepared arguments for each of those scenarios, layered, sequenced, each one built on the foundation of the one before. The way you build a fence line post by post. Nothing decorative, everything load-bearing. She used the first argument, then the second. Harlan was careful and quiet, and asked precise questions which told her he was actually listening, which was more than she'd allowed herself to hope for in the wagon that morning. Cal sat to her left and did not speak. Not because she'd asked him not to, she hadn't had no right to, but because he understood, without her needing to explain it, that this was her territory, the way the barn was his, and that the most useful thing he could do was be present and not interfere. He was very good at being present. She noticed that. The twist came at the 40-minute mark, when Harlan pulled a file from his cabinet that she hadn't expected him to have. He set it on the desk. "I need to show you something," he said, and his voice had changed, lost the careful institutional neutrality, and taken on something more direct. Not warmer exactly, more honest. The file contained a letter, dated 3 weeks prior, signed by Heron Cutter. It was not just a report of payment discrepancy. It was a formal letter of intent to purchase contingent on foreclosure proceedings for the full Decker Ranch parcel, North 40 South 40 water rights, and all improvements, at a price that was considerably below market value, filed 3 weeks ago, before Cutter had come to speak to Cal, before Tuesday's encounter outside Granger's store, before any of it. Marin read the letter. She read it twice. She set it down on the desk with both hands flat because she needed a moment to keep her face where she needed it to be. Cal leaned forward and read it over her shoulder. She felt the moment he understood. It felt it in the slight change of his breathing, the way his weight shifted forward. "He filed a purchase offer before he reported the discrepancy," Cal said. It was not a question. "Yes," Harlan said. He was looking at Marin. "Mrs. Voss, I want to be clear, this bank did not solicit this offer. It arrived unsolicited, and it was logged as received, which is standard procedure. I did not know when the discrepancy report came in 2 days later that the two were connected." "But now you do," she said. "Now I do," he said. The room was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough?" Cal asked. His voice was controlled, but only just. Marin held up a hand, not to silence him, to hold the space while she thought. She needed 4 seconds. She counted them. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "a purchase offer filed before a discrepancy report by the same party to the same institution on the same property, that's not coincidence. That's a sequenced action. And if the discrepancy report contained a material misrepresentation," she tapped her own documents, "which these records demonstrate it did, then you have a party who filed false information with a federally regulated bank for the purpose of triggering a foreclosure from which they intended to directly profit." Harlan was very still. "That's a serious allegation," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is. And I'm not making it to this bank. I'm making it to you personally as the loan officer of record, so that you understand what position the bank is in if it continues to advance these proceedings without reviewing the documentation I've provided." She met his eyes. "I am not here to threaten your institution, Mr. Harlan. I am here to give you the information you need to make a correct decision. What you do with it is your business." Harlan looked at the deposit slip, at the land office record, at Cutter's letter, at the purchase offer. He closed the file. "I'm going to suspend the proceedings pending internal review," he said. 30 days. During that time, I'll need a complete payment reconciliation from your records, every entry, every date, every amount against our own ledger." "I can have that to you within the week," Marin said. "Good." He looked at Cal. "Mr. Decker, I apologize for the alarm this notice must have caused. If the records confirm what Mrs. Voss has presented today, the default notice will be withdrawn." "And the purchase offer," Cal said. Harlan looked at the file. "Will be declined," he said, formally and in writing. They didn't speak until they were back in the wagon and 2 blocks from the bank. Then Cal pulled the horses up short in front of the feed merchants and sat with the reins loose in his hands and said nothing for a long moment. Marin sat beside him and let the silence be what it needed to be. "He filed that offer 3 weeks ago," Cal said finally. "Yes, while I was feeding cattle and fixing fence and not reading my ledger." He said it without self-pity, just with the particular flatness of a man acknowledging what he'd missed and what it had nearly cost him. "You couldn't have known," she said. "I should have read the ledger," he said. "Yes," she said, "you should have." She said it gently, not to wound him because she respected him too much to cushion the truth. "But you know now, and the ledger will be read going forward." He looked at her. "By you," he said. "If you want me to," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he picked up the reins. "I want you to," he said, and clicked the horses forward. The reconciliation took 4 days. Marin worked through every entry in the Decker ledger from the day it was opened, cross-referencing against the bank's copy she'd obtained from Harlan, the land office record, and the receipt book she'd found in the strongbox under the bed. Cal brought her coffee and asked no questions, and occasionally sat across the table, reading a farming almanac he clearly didn't need to read in the way of a man who wanted to be in the room without making demands on the room. She found 7 discrepancies total. 5 were minor rounding errors that had accumulated over 4 years, the kind of drift that happened when ledgers were kept by someone working from memory rather than receipt. 2 were the October misposting she'd already documented, and a second error in February of the same year that had been posted to a different account entirely, not Cutter's doing, just honest carelessness at the bank's end. Every one was correctable. Every correction favored Cal. She built the reconciliation document the way she built everything: structure first, then detail, then verification. When it was done, it was 14 pages, every figure sourced and footnoted, clear enough that the bank's own examiner could follow it without assistance. She read it through one final time the morning she planned to send it, then set it on the table in front of Cal. "Read it," she said. He looked up from the almanac. "All of it," he said. "All of it," she said. "You need to know what's in your own records." He looked at the 14 pages. He picked them up and read them. All of them. It took him 40 minutes, and she cleaned the kitchen while he read, and did not hover because a man reading his own finances needed to be alone with the information. When he set the pages down, he was quiet for a moment. "February," he said. "The misposting. Not Cutter, bank error. But it's been sitting there for 8 months. "Yes. How much does that fix total?" he said. "When it's corrected?" She told him. He sat back in his chair. The number was not large, not life-changing in absolute terms, but in the context of a ranch that had been slowly losing ground for 3 years. It was the difference between a ledger that told a story of deficit and a ledger that told a story of something closer to solidity. "I thought I was further behind than I was," he said quietly. "You were behind," she said. "Just not as far." He looked at the reconciliation again, then at her. "My father used to say that most men don't fail from bad luck," he said. "They fail from not knowing what they have." "Your father was right," she said. "He was wrong about most things," Cal said. "But that one he had." She sent the reconciliation to Harlan that afternoon via the postal agent with a covering letter that laid out each correction clearly and cited the relevant bank regulation for each disputed entry. Formal, clean, unarguable. Then she came home and fixed the curtains. She'd been putting it off not because the curtains were difficult, but because they were the kind of work you do when the urgent things are handled, and until that afternoon there had always been something more urgent. But now the porch was solid, the windows were sealed, the kitchen floor had its new boards laid and stained to within 1 shade of the original, the hayloft gap was patched. The ledger was reconciled and the bank proceedings were suspended. The curtains were what was left. They were the original curtains from when the house was built, she thought heavy cotton. Once a deep blue, faded now to a color somewhere between gray and memory. One had a long tear along the hem. Another had lost 2 of its rings and hung at an angle that had become so familiar It probably no longer registered as wrong to anyone who'd been looking at it for years. She spread them on the kitchen table and worked with the patience she reserved for fine repair. Close stitches, matched thread, as close as she could get it from the spool she'd bought in town. She re-sewed the hem tear with a flat fell seam so the repair wouldn't show from the front. She replaced the missing rings from a set she'd found in the bottom of the mending basket she'd reorganized her first week. Cal came in while she was working and stopped. He looked at the curtains. "Those were my mother's," he said. He said it the way you say something that surprises you when it comes out of your own mouth, as though the words had moved faster than the thought behind them. Marin looked up. "Should I not?" "No," he started. "I mean, they've needed it." He came closer and looked at the hem she'd repaired. He was looking for the seam and couldn't find it. She watched him not find it. "My mother made those the first winter they were here. She and my father, 1864. He touched the fabric lightly with 2 fingers. "She said the house needed color." Marin looked at the curtains. "She was right," she said. Cal was quiet. She could feel what was happening in the room, the particular quality of a man encountering the physical presence of someone he'd loved and lost, brought back not by memory, but by the sight of something repaired. It was a different thing than grief, closer to recognition. The acknowledgement that a thing had been cared for and that someone had bothered to care for it. She kept her eyes on her work. "She would have liked you," he said. She stopped sewing. She kept her eyes down for a moment longer. "How do you know?" she said. Her voice came out slightly quieter than she'd intended. "She didn't have much patience for people who didn't know what they were worth," he said. She had a great deal of patience for people who did. Marin set down the curtain. She looked at him. He was standing with his hand still resting lightly on the fabric, not looking at her, but not looking at her either, looking at some middle distance that held both the curtain and the room, and something else she didn't have a name for. "Cal," she said. "Yes." "I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her fully. "My homestead," she said. "The bank took it the day after I arrived here. I got the notice from the postal agent when I was in town for the reconciliation." A pause. "I know," he said. She blinked. "You know, Tom at the crossroads mentioned it 3 days ago." He held her gaze. "I didn't bring it up because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She looked at him. "You've known for 3 days," she said. "Yes." "And you didn't say anything." "You were working," he said simply. She absorbed that, the straightforwardness of it, the complete absence of pity or of the particular territorial anxiety that most men felt when a woman's circumstance changed and they had to recalculate what they were dealing with. He'd known. He'd waited. He'd let her work. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said. She said it clearly. Not as a plea, she was constitutionally incapable of framing it as a plea, but as a fact that required stating. "That's the situation. I want you to know it, so we're both making decisions with accurate information." "All right," he said. "All right meaning what?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Meaning, I know," he said. "Meaning the room is yours as long as you want it." A pause. "Meaning the job, whatever we're calling it now, isn't contingent on you having somewhere else." She held his gaze. "I don't want charity," she said. "I know you don't," he said. "It isn't charity. The reconciliation alone is worth 6 months' wages. The porch, the floor, the damper, the cutter situation." He said it matter-of-factly, as if reading a ledger which she realized was exactly what he was doing. He was reading the account between them and reporting the balance. "You've more than earned your place here, Marin. I think you knew that before I did." She was quiet. Something she'd been holding tightly, and for a long time, not just since she arrived here, but before for months, maybe longer. The sustained muscular effort of a woman who had been holding herself together through will alone. Because there was nothing else to hold on to, she felt it loosen. Just slightly. Just enough. She picked up the curtain. "I'll finish these tonight," she said. "I want them hung before the week's out." "I'll put up the new rings tomorrow," he said. "The original brackets are still good." She nodded. He went to the stove and did something unnecessary with the coffee pot, and she sewed, and the house held them both in its particular warmth. And outside, the Wyoming sky was doing what Wyoming skies did, enormous and indifferent and beautiful in a way that required nothing from you and asked nothing in return, which was, Marin thought, exactly the right kind of beautiful for a place like this.
Yatosas.
3 days later, Harlan's letter arrived. She knew what it was from the return address, the same way she'd known the first letter. But this one she did not feel in her stomach. She'd done the work. She knew the numbers. She knew what the letter had to say, because she had made it say it document by document, argument by argument over the past 10 days. She brought it in from the postal run and set it on the kitchen table. Cal was eating breakfast. He looked at the envelope, looked at her. "Open it," she said. He opened it. He read it. He set it down on the table and was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up. "Default notice withdrawn," he said. "Payment record corrected. Cutter's purchase offer formally declined." He paused. "Bank is initiating a review of the discrepancy report for compliance purposes." She sat down. "The compliance review," she said. "That's more than I expected." "Harlan's protecting himself," Cal said. "If Cutter did file a false report, he'll need a paper trail showing the bank caught it," she finished. "Yes." She looked at the letter. "That might make things complicated for Cutter, officially." "Good," Cal said. It was a simple word, entirely sufficient. She looked at the letter a moment longer. 14 pages of reconciliation, 90 minutes in Harlan's office, 57 days that had turned into 11. The rider, the patent, the certified search, the burned biscuits, and the midnight coffee, and the curtains she'd repaired with her mother's needle case and thread she'd bought with the last of her traveling money. "Good," she agreed. Cal pushed the bread plate toward her side of the table. She took a piece. They ate. The curtains hung blue and whole in the front room windows, and the kitchen floor was solid underfoot, and the flue drew clean and steady, and somewhere between the first morning she'd arrived and this one without a formal moment of transition, the Decker Ranch had stopped feeling like a job. It felt like the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. She wasn't sure she needed one yet. She just knew she wasn't leaving. The letter from Harlan had been sitting folded in Cal's breast pocket for 2 days. Not because he'd forgotten it. Because he kept reaching for it in the barn at the fence line, walking back from the south pasture, and taking it halfway out and then putting it back. Like a man who wants to read something a second time, but doesn't quite trust what it does to him when he reads it. Marin noticed. She noticed most things. She didn't say anything. She was reorganizing the hayloft. She'd identified the problem. Her first week, the way the bales were stacked, created gaps where moisture collected against the interior wall, which was why the eave had begun to separate. It wasn't a structural failure. It was a stacking failure. Something that could have been corrected any time in the last 2 years if someone had understood the connection between airflow and rot. She understood the connection. Cal found her up there on the 4th morning after Harlan's letter, moving bales with a methodical efficiency that made the work look simpler than it was. She'd been at it since before he came out to the barn. He could tell by the sweat at her collar, and the way she was breathing, controlled, sustained the rhythm of someone well into a job rather than just starting one. He stood at the bottom of the ladder and looked up. "You should have said," he said. "I wanted to finish the east wall before the weather changed," she said, not stopping. "I mean, you should have said you were going to do this at all. I could have." "I know," she said. "But I woke up at 4 and the solution was in my head, and if I'd waited for a reasonable hour, I would have started thinking about the bank review and the garden drainage and the south fence post that's leaning, and I'd have lost the thread." He was quiet for a moment. "Does your brain always work like that?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Since I was 8 years old. My mother called it a affliction. My father called it architecture." "What do you call it?" She pushed a bale into its new position and sat back on her heels to evaluate the gap. "Useful," she said. He climbed the ladder. She looked at him when his head cleared the loft floor, not surprised, just registering. He came up and looked at what she'd done. Then he picked up the next bale without being asked and moved it where the logic of what she'd already built indicated it should go. She watched him place it. 2 left, she said. They moved them together. It took less than 4 minutes. When it was done, she walked the perimeter of the restacked section and pressed her hand against the interior wall where the moisture had been collecting. Already better, she could feel the difference in airflow against her palm. "That's it," she said. "That's it," he agreed. He was standing closer than work required. Not inappropriately, just the natural result of a loft that wasn't designed for 2 people to move around in simultaneously, and neither of them had stepped back. Marin was acutely aware of this, in the way she'd been acutely aware of the distance between them for the past week, a gradual growing awareness of proximity as something that carried its own specific weight. She stepped back. "The south fence post," she said. "The leaning one." "I'll look at it today," he said. "Thank you," she said, and went down the ladder. She was in the garden that afternoon when Tom Greer rode up. She knew Tom. She'd seen him twice at the Crossroads postal station. He was the kind of man who delivered news the way some men delivered packages efficiently, without editorial, and then departed before you could make him responsible for your reaction to the contents. He had a letter. Not from Harlan this time. The return address was the Territorial Bank Examiner's office in Cheyenne. She thanked Tom. He tipped his hat and left at the same pace he'd arrived. She looked at the envelope. She did not open it immediately. She stood in the garden with dirt on her hands and the envelope in one clean finger, and felt the particular held breath quality of a moment before you know something that will change the shape of what comes next. Then she opened it. She read it once. Fast, the way she read everything first for structure and overall direction. Then she read it again slowly. Heron Cutter had been formally cited by the Territorial Bank Examiner for filing a materially misleading report with a federally regulated lending institution. The citation carried a mandatory review period, during which Cutter was prohibited from entering into any new land agreements or loan instruments within the territory. The examiner's office was additionally reviewing the Dillard, Keene, and Morrison transactions, all 3 by name, in the letter for similar irregularities. She stood very still. Then she sat down on the garden bench, the one she'd reinforced 2 weeks ago because 2 of the slats had been close to giving, and read it a 3rd time. It was more than she'd expected. Considerably more. She had given Harlan the information and trusted him to do the correct thing with it. She had not anticipated that correct thing extending to a full territorial review. That was Harlan's decision, his action, his institutional courage, and it meant that whatever Cutter had been building across this county, the architecture of it was about to be examined in full daylight. She heard Cal's boots on the path. She looked up. He'd seen her sit down from the fence line and come in, she could tell from the direction he'd come. He looked at her face. "What is it?" he said immediately. No preamble. She held up the letter. He took it, read it. She watched his face while he read. She'd gotten good at reading Cal Decker's face in the past 3 weeks. Not because it was expressive, it wasn't, but because the control itself was readable once you knew it. The slight tension in his jaw when something landed hard, the almost imperceptible exhale when something resolved. Both happened, in that order. He lowered the letter. "Dillard," he said. "Keene, Morrison." "All 3, she said. "He might get the Dillard 40 back," Cal said. "He might," she said. "Depends on how far the examiner's review goes and whether the original transaction can be unwound. But even if it can't, Dillard will know. He'll know that what happened to him was documented and recorded, and that someone in an official position recognized it for what it was." She paused. "That's not nothing." Cal looked at the letter again. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." He stood there for a moment. The afternoon was cooling the wind off the ridge, steady and dry. Then he sat down on the bench beside her. Not at the far end. Not with the careful distance he'd maintained for 3 weeks. In the middle, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. He put the letter on his knee and looked at it. "You did this," he said. "I gave Harlan information," she said. "Marin?" She looked at him. "You did this," he said again. No elaboration, no performance. Just a direct, clear, unambiguous statement of a fact that he wanted her to accept without diminishing. She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "I did." He nodded once. And then something happened that she had not prepared for. He reached out and put his hand over hers, where it rested on the bench between them. Not dramatically, not with the hesitance of a man unsure of his reception. He was not that kind of uncertain. He set his hand over hers the way he did everything directly, without wasted motion, having decided to do it before he did it. His hand was large and roughened and very warm. She did not move. She looked at their hands for a moment. Then she turned her hand over so her palm was against his. Neither of them said anything. The wind moved through the ridge pines. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted. The garden around them smelled of turned earth and what was beginning finally to grow in it. But the story was not done. It never finished cleanly. She knew that life didn't clean finish the way ledger entries did. There was always one more column. The one more column arrived the next morning in the form of a writer from town. Not Tom this time, a younger man she didn't recognize, who handed Cal a folded note and left at a trot. Cal read it. His face went through its sequenced tight jaw, controlled exhale, and then he handed it to Marin without speaking. It was from Harlan. Short. 3 sentences. Cutter has retained legal counsel from Cheyenne. Counsel has filed a motion to suppress the bank examiner's review on grounds of procedural irregularity. Motion has been accepted for hearing date set for the 22nd. The 22nd was 9 days away. Marin read it twice. Procedural irregularity, she said. What does that mean? Cal said. It means his lawyer found something in the way Harlan filed the examiner report that can be challenged on technical grounds. She folded the note. Not the substance, the procedure. If the motion succeeds, the review gets thrown out and Cutter starts clean. Cal was very still. Can he do that? He said. A Cheyenne lawyer with the right judge. She set the note on the table. Possibly. Procedural challenges are difficult to fight because they're not about whether you're right. They're about whether the form was correct. She paused. Harlan would need documentation showing his filing was procedurally sound, which means he needs someone who knows the examiner's filing requirements well enough to produce that documentation. Do you know them? Cal said. She looked at him. I know how to find them, she said. She was already moving toward the document case. She spent 2 days in the Territorial Records office. Cal drove her to Laramie again, and this time didn't wait in the wagon. He waited inside in the anteroom with his hat on his knee for 6 hours the first day and 5 hours the second. When clerks gave him questioning looks, he looked back with the settled expression of a man who was exactly where he intended to be and did not require their input. Marin worked through the Territorial Bank Examiner's procedural code the way she'd worked through everything structure first detail after. By the end of the first day, she had identified the specific filing requirement Cutter's lawyer was targeting, a notification clause that required the examiner's office to formally inform the subject of any report within 5 days of filing. Harlan had sent the notification on day 6. 1 day. 1 day late. She sat in the records room at the end of that first day and put both hands flat on the table and breathed. 1 day was enough technically to challenge the filing. Cutter's lawyer knew what he was doing. She thought. She thought for a long time. Then she went back to the procedural code and read it again. Not the section she'd already found, but the section before it, and the section before that. Going back to the original 1876 code, before the 1879 revisions. She found it at 8 in the evening, when the records clerk was pointedly stacking files near her table as a hint. The 1876 original code contained a provision carried forward into the 1879 revision, but placed in a different section, far enough from the notification clause that a lawyer building a narrow procedural argument might not cross-reference it, that allowed a 2-day extension on notification timing in cases where the initial report involved third-party documentation requiring verification. Harlan's report had required exactly that. He'd needed to verify Marin's documents before filing. Day 6 fell within the extended window. The procedural challenge was void. She wrote it out that night in the wagon on the way home by the light. Cal held steady for her without being asked. Without complaint, without a single unnecessary word while she wrote in the dark. And the road was rough, and her handwriting was not as clean as she'd have liked, but was accurate, which was what mattered. When she finished, she put the pen down. "Got it," Cal said. "Got it," she said. He lowered the lamp. They wrote in the dark. After a while he said, "How did you know to look in the 1876 version?" "Because lawyers who find procedural holes look for the most recent code," she said. "They don't always go back to the origin." The provision was restructured in 1879 when they reorganized the sections. If you only read the 1879 version, the cross-reference isn't obvious. He was quiet. "But you went back," he said. "I always go back," she said. "My father said that the answer to most present problems is usually written down somewhere in the past. You just have to be willing to look further back than the other person." Cal drove for a moment. "Your father sounds like a man I'd have liked to know," he said. She looked at the dark road ahead. "He would have liked you," she said. It came out before she entirely decided to say it. He respected people who did their work quietly and didn't need to be thanked for it. A pause. "I need to thank you," Cal said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't say it because you need to hear it. I say it because it's owed." She was quiet. "Cal," she said. "Yes." "Stop the wagon." He stopped the wagon. She turned on the seat and looked at him directly in the dark, which was not entirely dark. There was a moon partial enough to see by. "I need you to understand something," she said. "All right," he said. "I did not come here to be saved," she said. "I did not come here to find a man who would let me stay. I came here because I needed work and you needed someone who could sew, and both of those things were true and practical." She held his gaze. "Everything I've done here I've done because it needed doing, and I knew how to do it. Not for you, for the work itself. Do you understand that?" He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "Good." She paused. "And I need you to understand one more thing." "Go ahead," he said. "I am choosing to stay," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else. I have nowhere else, that's true, but that's not why." She kept her voice even and clear. "I'm choosing to stay because this is the first place in 3 years where what I know and what I can do has been—" She searched for the word met properly. "By someone who didn't need me to be less than I am in order for him to be enough." She stopped. "That's not a common thing." Cal was very still. The horse shifted in its traces. The partial moon sat above the ridge. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." "So when you thank me," she said, "I need you to know that I am here because I have decided to be, not from need, from choice." A pause. "That distinction matters to me more than I can fully explain." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched her face, his rough, warm hand against her cheek, brief and deliberate, and then back. "It matters to me too," he said. "The same way, the same reason." She absorbed that. Then she turned back to face the road. "Drive," she said. He drove. The procedural motion was denied on the 22nd. Marin wasn't in the courtroom. She'd prepared the documentation, reviewed it with Harlan's attorney over a 2-hour meeting in Laramie 3 days prior, and then come home and fix the garden drainage because the south end of the bed had been pooling after rain, and it was time. Cal came back from town at 4 in the afternoon. She heard the wagon. She kept working. She heard him come through the house, heard the back door, heard his boots on the new kitchen boards solid now, no hollow sound. He came and stood at the edge of the garden. "Motion denied," he said. She sat back on her heels. "The 1876 provision held up," she said. "The judge cited it specifically," he said. Harlan's attorney said he quoted it almost verbatim. She pressed her palms against her knees. Something settled in her. Deep and final, the specific settling of a weight she'd been carrying for so long it had stopped feeling like a weight and started feeling like just the way her body was arranged. She felt it release. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a slow, complete exhale at a cellular level. "And the review," she said. "Continues," he said. "Full scope. All 3 properties." He paused. "Dillard's been notified, and the Keen widow." She nodded. "Good," she said. He crouched down at the garden edge, which put him at her level, which she noticed because Cal Decker did not, as a rule, arrange himself to be at eye level with other people. He was tall enough that it was never necessary, and it wasn't a thing she'd seen him do before. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. "Harlan sent a second letter," he said. He took it from his pocket. "It's addressed to you." She took the envelope. Her name on it in the bank's formal type, Mrs. Marin Voss, account manager, Decker Ranch. She opened it. It was a formal letter of professional acknowledgement. 3 paragraphs. The kind of letter a bank wrote when it wanted to document that a specific individual had rendered a specific service. It named her. It described what she'd done. It cited by reference the documents she'd produced and the statutory arguments she'd made. The last paragraph offered formally, and in writing, the bank's willingness to provide a professional reference for her account management services should she ever require one. She read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully. "He didn't have to do this," she said. "No," Cal said. "This is woo." She stopped. She looked at the folded letter. "Do you know what this is?" "Tell me," he said. "It's a record," she said. "It's an official documented notarized record that I existed in a professional capacity, that I did a thing, and it was recognized." She looked at him. "A woman in this territory in 1882 does not have many of those." He looked at her steadily. "You should have more of them," he said. She put the letter in her apron pocket against her chest. She picked up her trowel. "The drainage is almost done," she said. "Another hour." "I'll start supper," he said. She looked at him. "You'll start supper?" "I can cook," he said. "I'm not good at it, but I can do it." "What will you make?" He thought about this with the seriousness he applied to practical problems. "Beans," he said, "and probably something burned." She smiled, the real one, the one that happened before she decided to. "I'll be in before it burns," she said. "I know you will," he said. He went inside. She finished the drainage as the light changed. She washed her hands at the pump and stood for a moment in the cooling air and looked at the house. The windows were lit from inside. Cal moving around the kitchen, the warm light from the lamp making the repaired curtains glow faintly blue. The exact blue they'd been before time had faded them, or close enough. Close enough holds. That was what she'd said about the stain on the kitchen boards. She'd been talking about wood. But standing here now, she understood she'd been talking about something else as well. Something that applied to more than floors. Something that applied to the architecture of a life being rebuilt from the materials available. Imperfect, practical, and sturdy enough if you didn't waste what you had. She went inside. Cal was at the stove. The beans were not burned. The biscuits were a reasonable approximation of biscuits. He'd set the table without ceremony plates. Cups, spoons placed with the same no-frills efficiency he brought to everything. She sat down. He sat down. He poured the coffee. She reached across the table for the salt, and their hands met over it. Her reaching forward, his passing it, and for a moment, they were both holding it. Not moving, not making anything of it. Just 2 hands on the same object in the same moment, which is one of the quietest ways 2 people can acknowledge each other. He let go first, which meant she ended up holding the salt, which meant she could set it down and pick up her fork, and the moment passed without needing to be named. But it had happened. "The garden will come in well," she said, "if we get rain in the next 2 weeks." "We usually do," he said. "Early July." "I'll need more seed for the east bed," she said. "I want to try turnips. The soil's good on that side." "I'll get them next time I'm in town," he said. She looked at him. "I can get them." "I know you can," he said. "I'll get them." She looked at him a moment longer. "All right," she said. They ate. The biscuits were slightly dense, and the beans were under-seasoned, and it was the best supper she'd had in longer than she could clearly remember, because food eaten without fear tastes different than food eaten while calculating how long it has to last. She had stopped calculating. That was the thing she hadn't noticed until this exact moment. She had stopped calculating an exit. She had stopped keeping a portion of herself in reserve against the necessity of leaving. She was here, fully. In this kitchen, at this table, in this house, that she had repaired board by board, and seam by seam, and entry by entry, until it had stopped being his house and a job, and had become, without a formal announcement, simply the place where she lived. "Cal," she said. He looked up. "The needle case," she said. "The one my mother gave me." "Yes," he said. "She gave it to me the day I married Edmund," she said. She said. She paused, finding the exact words which mattered. She said, "Whatever else happens, a woman who knows how to mend things will always have a use for herself in the world." She looked at the table. "I thought for a long time that was a small thing to say, a practical thing, like advice about preserving jars." "But," he said. She looked up. "She wasn't talking about sewing," she said. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I don't think she was." Marin reached into her apron pocket. She set the needle case on the table between them, small, worn smooth at the corners. The original clasp replaced twice the stitching on the leather cover, restitched in a thread that didn't quite match. Repaired. Still functional. Still here. Cal looked at it. He reached out and touched it lightly with 2 fingers, the same way he'd touched his mother's curtains. The gesture of a man acknowledging something he understood the weight of. He looked up at her. "Marin Voss," he said. It was the 3rd time he'd said her full name. The first had been the morning she'd arrived, when he was still deciding what she was. The second had been in Harlan's office, reflexive, when he'd been startled into formality. This time was different, deliberate, warm, carrying everything that had been built between the first time and now. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I'm glad you got off that stagecoach," he said. She looked at him for a moment. At his steady, weathered, entirely unperformed face. At the man who had signed her document without reading every line because he'd decided to trust her. Who had let her work without diminishing it. Who had known about her homestead for 3 days and said nothing because she was working, and he respected that. Who had sat in an anteroom for 11 hours across 2 days and not once made her feel that his patience had a limit. "So am I," she said. She picked up the needle case and put it back in her pocket. She picked up her fork. The lamp burned steady. The curtains held their color. The floor was solid underfoot. The flue drew clean and the ledger was balanced, and outside the Wyoming night was doing what it always did, enormous, unhurried, asking nothing. And Marin Voss, who had arrived at a broken ranch with a needle case and a determination that had outlasted everything thrown against it, was home. Not rescued into it. Not collapsed into it from exhaustion. Not settled for it because nothing better had come. She had built her way here, one repaired thing at a time, and she had chosen to stay. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. And it was enough, more than enough, to last.